He never held the baby. The fluorescent hum of Toronto Western's maternity wing pressed against the walls like a held breath, and Imani Duval lay sinking into hospital pillows, her body still trembling from 16 hours of labor. Sweat clung to her temples. Her fingers ached from gripping the bed rails. But none of that mattered because her daughter was here, 6 pounds and 4 ounces of perfect, sleeping in the bassinet beside her, with a tiny knitted cap pulled low over dark curls. The door swung open, and for one foolish second, Imani thought Bryce had brought flowers. He hadn't. Bryce Kessler walked in wearing his charcoal canali suit, the one he saved for board presentations. No diaper bag slung over his shoulder. No tired smile of a new father. Just a leather portfolio tucked under his arm and a Mont Blanc pen already uncapped in his right hand. He didn't glance at the bassinet. "I need you to sign something," he said, setting the portfolio on the rolling tray. His voice carried the same flat efficiency he used when closing vendor contracts. "Tonight, ideally." Imani blinked, her thoughts still foggy from the epidural wearing off. "Sign what?" "Bryce, she's barely an hour old, which is why we should do this now." Cleanly. He flipped the portfolio open. The header on the first page read separation agreement in bold serif type. "I've had Whitaker draft everything. You get the Leslieville condo, the Audi, and a lump sum. I keep the firm." The words entered her ears but refused to make sense. Separation. The firm. She stared at the pen he held out to her, its gold nib catching the overhead light like a tiny blade. "You're leaving me," she whispered. Not a question. Understanding arrived the way a crack spreads through ice, slowly at first, then all at once. "Our marriage has run its course." He said it the way someone might comment on a quarterly report. "I can't build what I'm building and carry this. I need a clean start. Carry this." As if their daughter, their life, their 10 years together were cargo he'd decided to offload. A nurse pushed through the door with fresh blankets, took one look at the scene, and stopped. She was older, maybe late 50s, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the kind of steady gaze that suggested she'd seen every version of human cruelty a hospital could hold. "Mr. Kessler," the nurse said firmly, "your wife's blood pressure hasn't stabilized. She needs rest. This can wait." "This is between us," Bryce snapped. "This is my unit," the nurse replied without raising her voice, "and I'm asking you to step outside." For a stretched, airless moment, Bryce held the nurse's stare. Then he dropped the pen on the tray with a sharp click. 5 minutes, he said, and walked out. His Italian shoes tapped down the corridor like a metronome, counting down to something Imani couldn't yet name. The nurse, her badge read Estelle, sat at the edge of the bed and placed a warm hand on Imani's wrist. "Breathe, sweetheart, slow, in through the nose." Imani tried. The air felt like broken glass. Her daughter stirred in the bassinet, a tiny mewling sound that should have been the most beautiful noise in the world, but instead landed on a heart already fracturing. "He said I get the condo," Imani murmured, almost laughing at the absurdity. "Like that's generous. Men who hand divorce papers to women in hospital beds aren't thinking about generous," Estelle said. "They're thinking about timing." Timing. Bryce Kessler had always been obsessed with timing. The right moment to pitch a client, the right quarter to expand, the right second to strike when someone was too weak to fight back. Through the window in the door, Imani could see him in the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, his posture loose, his mouth curving into a grin she hadn't seen directed at her in months. He laughed. Low, private, intimate, a laugh meant for someone who wasn't his wife. Estelle noticed too. She said nothing. She didn't have to. Half an hour later, the hallway outside Imani's room shifted. A woman appeared at the nurse's station. Tall, silver-haired, wrapped in a long wool coat the color of storm clouds. She carried a worn leather briefcase and moved with the unhurried certainty of someone who had spent decades bending courtrooms to her will. Lorraine Ossie, attorney, trustee, and the only person alive who fully understood the legal architecture Ruth Duval had built before she died. Imani's grandmother had been a real estate developer in Montreal before most people believed a black woman could own a city block, let alone 30 of them. Ruth Duval built housing co-ops, heritage restorations, and eventually one of the largest private land trusts in southern Ontario. She'd passed 7 years ago, but her legal footprint was still carved into the bedrock of 3 provinces. Lorraine entered the room quietly. Imani looked up, startled. "Lorraine? How did you?" Estelle called the emergency contact on your chart, Lorraine said. Your grandmother listed me 20 years ago. I never removed it. She set her briefcase down and took Imani's hand. Tell me everything, Imani told her. The portfolio on the tray, the separation agreement, the flat, boardroom voice, the way he hadn't looked at the baby. Lorraine listened without interrupting, her expression tightening with every sentence. When Imani finished, her voice cracked. He said, I'm walking away with nothing, that the firm is his, that everything we built. Lorraine gave a single, almost gentle shake of her head. Imani, your grandmother anticipated exactly this kind of man. What do you mean? Lorraine opened her briefcase and removed a thick folder sealed with a notary stamp dated 11 years ago. A year before Imani even met Bryce. The Duval Family Trust holds the commercial property portfolio your grandmother assembled over 40 years. 17 buildings across Toronto and Hamilton. The trust also holds the land beneath your firm's office tower on King Street West. Imani stared. The King Street office? Bryce signed the lease on that building. He signed a lease, Lorraine corrected, with a holding company. That holding company is a subsidiary of the Duval Trust. You, Imani, are the sole beneficiary. You have been since your 21st birthday. The room tilted. Imani gripped the bed rail, her mind racing. He doesn't know. No. Your grandmother specifically structured the trust through numbered companies to keep your name invisible. She wanted you protected, not targeted. Lorraine's voice dropped. And right now, Bryce Kessler is trying to divorce the woman who owns the ground his empire stands on. A sound between a laugh and a sob escaped Imani's throat. She pressed her palm against the bassinet where her daughter slept, feeling the tiny vibrations of breath through the plastic wall. Before either of them could speak again, the door banged open. Bryce stood in the frame, suit jacket off now, sleeves rolled to his elbows, impatience radiating off him like heat. Who are you? He demanded, staring at Lorraine. Lorraine Osi. I represent the Duval family estate. Estate, he laughed. Imani's grandmother left her a house in NDG and some costume jewelry. This is a private matter. Lorraine tilted her head. Is that what you believe? It's what I know. Then you know remarkably little, Mr. Kessler, for a man who signs leases worth 7 figures. Something flickered behind Bryce's eyes. Confusion, then the first pale shadow of doubt. He turned to Imani. What is she talking about? Imani said nothing. For the first time in years, she didn't feel obligated to fill his silence with reassurance. Bryce took a step forward, and Lorraine moved between them, with the quiet precision of someone who had spent a career standing between powerful men and the women they underestimated. Your wife is recovering from childbirth, Lorraine said. Whatever conversation you think you're entitled to can happen through my office, during business hours, when she has legal counsel present. She doesn't need counsel. She needs to sign. She needs rest. And you need to leave this room before I call hospital security myself. Bryce's jaw tightened. He looked at Imani as if waiting for her to apologize, to smooth things over the way she always had. She didn't. She looked at her daughter instead. He left. The door swung shut, and the room exhaled. 40 minutes later, the overhead speaker crackled with a sound that stopped every heart on the ward. Code Blue, maternity, room 7. Code Blue. Room 7 was Imani's room, but the alert wasn't for her. It was for the baby. Nurses flooded in. Imani's daughter had gone pale, her breathing shallow and labored. A neonatal team rushed her to the NICU while Imani screamed, reaching, grasping at air. Lorraine held her upright. Estelle ran alongside the incubator, barking vitals. In the NICU, the team worked quickly. Respiratory distress, common in newborns, the attending neonatologist explained, especially after a long labor. They stabilized her within 12 minutes, but those 12 minutes aged Imani by a decade. She sat beside the incubator, her hand pressed flat against the warm plastic, watching the monitors graph her daughter's every heartbeat. The baby's chest rose and fell, fragile but steady now. She's a fighter, the NICU nurse said. She gets that from her grandmother, Imani whispered. The peace lasted 19 minutes. A security guard appeared at the NICU door, looking uncomfortable. Mrs. Kessler, there's a situation downstairs. A woman tried to enter the maternity ward using your husband's visitor credentials. She became agitated when staff declined access. Imani's stomach dropped. Who is she? The guard hesitated. She identified herself as Mr. Kessler's partner. Partner. The word landed like a fist. Lorraine's eyes narrowed. Where is she now? Lobby security desk. She's refusing to leave. Imani closed her eyes. She could picture it perfectly. Some woman in expensive clothes making a scene in a hospital lobby while her newborn daughter fought to breathe one floor above. The absurdity and the cruelty of it tangled together until she couldn't separate them. I want to see her, Imani said. Lorraine touched her arm. You don't have to. I know. I want to. They took the elevator down. Imani moved slowly, one hand on the railing, the other pressed against the incision site from the emergency intervention during delivery. Every step hurt. She didn't care. The lobby was bright and mercilessly public. Tatum Mercer sat on a chrome bench near the security desk, arms crossed, mascara smudged, a camel-colored coat draped over her shoulders. She was younger than Imani expected. Mid-20s. Sharp cheekbones. The kind of effortful beauty that required weekly maintenance. Bryce stood between them, hands raised as if directing traffic at an intersection he'd caused. Imani, go back upstairs, he said immediately. This doesn't concern you. My husband's girlfriend trying to access my baby's ward doesn't concern me. Tatum flinched. I wasn't trying to, I just needed to talk to Bryce. In a maternity NICU. At midnight. Imani's voice was quiet but carried across the marble lobby like a stone skipping over still water. Tatum's chin trembled. She looked at Bryce, then back at Imani. He told me you two were separated. He said the divorce was already done. It's not, Imani said. I gave birth 4 hours ago. He brought divorce papers to my hospital bed. Tatum went pale. He said, he told me the marriage was over months ago. He told you what you needed to hear. Imani looked at Bryce then, and something shifted in her expression. Not anger exactly. Something cooler, steadier, more permanent. The quiet certainty of a woman who had just stopped believing in a man she'd loved for a decade. Bryce stepped forward, lowering his voice. Imani, let's not do this here. You're embarrassing yourself. Lorraine spoke from behind. She is the least embarrassed person in this room, Mr. Kessler. The security guard shifted on his feet. A nurse passing through slowed, watching. Tatum suddenly blurted. I'm pregnant. The lobby seemed to contract. Sound thinned. Bryce closed his eyes. 8 weeks, Tatum whispered, tears spilling. He knows. He's known since before tonight. Imani felt the words hit her sternum like cold water. She didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She simply looked at the man she had married on a September afternoon on the Toronto Islands, the man who'd read vows about partnership and permanence, with the lake glittering behind them. And she understood that he had never meant a single word. We're done, she said quietly. Imani. No, we are done. She turned and walked back to the elevator. Every step cost her something. Energy, innocence, the last thin thread of hope she'd been clutching without admitting it. But her spine stayed straight, her jaw stayed set. Upstairs, she sat beside her daughter's incubator and placed her hand against the plastic wall again. I'm going to name you Ruth, she whispered. After the strongest woman I ever knew. The baby shifted in her sleep, tiny fingers curling and uncurling as if grasping at something only she could see. 3 days later, baby Ruth was cleared for discharge. The neonatal team pronounced her healthy, her lungs strong, her vitals textbook. Imani dressed her in a white onesie with a small embroidered maple leaf, a gift from Estelle, the nurse who had stood guard on that first terrible night. Lorraine pulled her black Volvo to the hospital entrance. Imani strapped the car seat in carefully, kissed Ruth's forehead, and looked at the hospital doors one last time. Then she got in. They didn't drive to the Leslieville condo. They drove north, up the Don Valley Parkway and onto the 400, past subdivisions and strip malls, past frozen fields and pine forests, until the road narrowed and the trees grew taller and the sky opened wide. They drove to the Duval estate in Muskoka. Imani hadn't been here since her grandmother's funeral. The property sat on 40 acres of mixed forest and Canadian shield granite, sloping down to a private bay on Lake Rousseau. The main house was built of timber and stone. Not a mansion in the showy Toronto sense, but something older and more honest. A place that belonged to the land rather than sitting on top of it. Lorraine parked. Imani stepped out into cold, clean air that tasted like pine and snow. Ruth slept against her chest in a carrier, oblivious to everything except warmth. But Bryce's Range Rover was already in the driveway. He leaned against the hood, breath clouding in the January air, arms folded, jaw set. He looked like a man preparing for a siege. This is my home too, he said. We spend holidays here. I paid for the dock renovation. Imani shifted Ruth higher against her chest. You paid for a dock. You didn't pay for the land it's built on. Don't start with that trust nonsense. Lorraine stepped out of the car, carrying a binder thick enough to stop a door. Mr. Kessler, I'll make this simple. Your name does not appear on any deed, title, or ownership document associated with this property. It belongs to the Duval Family Trust. Imani is the sole beneficiary. You are, legally speaking, a guest who has overstayed. That's impossible. Ruth left her a house in Montreal. That's it. Ruth Duval left her granddaughter a land trust spanning 3 provinces, Lorraine said evenly, including the commercial real estate beneath your firm's office on King Street. Bryce went very still. Say that again. Your lease, your flagship office. The building where you conduct every meeting, close every deal, host every client dinner. It sits on Duval land, owned by your wife. The color drained from his face in stages, like paint peeling in reverse. He grabbed the binder from Lorraine's hands and flipped through it. Deeds, numbered company registrations, trust amendments, land surveys. Page after page of legal architecture his grandmother-in-law had built with the precision of a master engineer. No, he whispered. No, this isn't. She told me she had nothing. She didn't know the details, Imani said. And you never asked. You never cared about my family's history. You cared about yours. He threw the binder against the car. Pages scattered across the snowy driveway. You set me up. I gave birth to your daughter while you handed me divorce papers. The only person who set you up is standing in your mirror. Bryce took a step toward her. His hand reached out, not gently, not the way a man reaches for his wife, but the way someone grabs at something slipping from a shelf. Lorraine moved between them instantly. Touch her, and I will have you arrested on this property before your hand falls back to your side. He froze. From inside the house, a door opened. A woman emerged onto the stone porch, wrapped in a heavy cardigan, silver hair pinned neatly, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. Meredith Kessler, Bryce's mother. She had arrived the previous evening, after Lorraine called her. She had listened to everything. The hospital, the separation agreement, Tatum, the NICU incident. With the controlled quiet of a woman absorbing information she had long suspected but hoped wasn't true. Now she stood on the porch and looked at her son with an expression that held no anger, only a devastated, bone-deep disappointment. "Mom," Bryce said, startled. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here for Imani," Meredith said, "and for my granddaughter." The words landed like stones in still water. "You're taking her side?" Bryce's voice cracked. "I'm taking the truth's side." Meredith descended the steps, her boots crunching on the gravel. "I raised you better than this. Your father would be ashamed. Dad would have understood. Your father never once raised his voice at me in a hospital. Your father never handed me papers while I was bleeding." Her voice broke on the last word. She stopped, collected herself. Then she walked past her son, straight to Imani, and placed a gentle hand on baby Ruth's head. "She looks like you," Meredith whispered, strong. Imani's eyes filled. She had expected to fight Meredith too. She had expected to fight everyone. Instead, her mother-in-law kissed Ruth's forehead and said, "Come inside. I made soup." Bryce stood alone in the driveway, snow settling on his shoulders, watching 3 generations of women walk into a house he thought was his. Inside, the fireplace crackled. Meredith heated butternut squash soup, while Lorraine spread documents across the dining table. Imani nursed Ruth in the armchair by the window, watching the frozen lake through glass that her grandmother had chosen 30 years ago. "There's something else," Lorraine said, pulling an envelope from the bottom of her briefcase. Ivory paper. The Duval family crest embossed in dark green. "Your grandmother left instructions that this be delivered after the birth of your first child." Imani took it with one hand, the other cradling Ruth. She broke the seal. Her grandmother's handwriting, elegant, slanting, unmistakable, filled the page. "My sweet girl. If you're reading this, you are a mother now, and the world looks different than it did yesterday. I built what I built so you would never need permission to stand on your own ground. Some men will love you for your light. Others will try to own it. Know the difference. And when the time comes, remember, the land doesn't lie, even when people do. I love you past the pines and back." Imani pressed the letter against her chest and cried. Not the panicked, shallow sobs of the hospital. Deep, slow, releasing tears. The kind that come when something broken finally finds a shape it can hold. Meredith set a bowl of soup beside her without a word. Lorraine cleared her throat gently. There's a second document in the envelope. Your grandmother transferred her controlling interest in Duval Holdings to your name upon the birth of your first child. That includes the commercial portfolio, the Muskoka properties, and the partnership stake in 2 Toronto development firms. Imani stared at the numbers. She had gone from a woman handed divorce papers in a hospital bed to one of the largest private landholders in southern Ontario, not because anyone rescued her. Because a woman she loved had built a fortress around her future before she even knew she'd need one. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. Tatum's voice came through, thin and shaking. Imani, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but you need to know something. I'm listening. Bryce isn't just angry, he's panicking. He called his accountant tonight and started moving money. He's trying to liquidate assets before the divorce filing goes through, and he told me. Her voice broke. He told me he's going to claim you were mentally unstable during the pregnancy. That you're an unfit mother, he wants full custody. The words hit like ice water. Imani looked down at Ruth, asleep in her arms, and felt something ancient and ferocious rise inside her chest. He also told me, Tatum continued, barely audible, that I should delete all our messages, all the photos, everything. He said if I cooperated, he'd take care of me and the baby. But if I didn't, she trailed off. He threatened you, Imani said. He said he'd make sure no one believed me about anything. Silence. Then Imani said something she never expected to say to this woman. Are you safe? Tatum sobbed. I don't know. Where are you? A motel in Barrie. He cut off my credit card. Imani looked at Lorraine, who was already reaching for her phone. Then at Meredith, whose face had hardened into something granite-like. Stay where you are, Imani said. We're sending someone. When she hung up, Meredith spoke first, her voice steady but raw. That woman is carrying my grandchild. Whatever she's done, she doesn't deserve to be discarded the way he discards everyone. Lorraine made 2 calls. The first was to a family law associate in Barrie. The second was to the Ontario Securities Commission. By the next morning, the architecture of Bryce Kessler's life had begun to collapse with the same ruthless speed he'd used to try to dismantle Imani's. The board of his firm, alerted by irregularities in the financial transfers Tatum had described, convened an emergency session. They discovered what Lorraine had known for weeks, that Bryce had been funneling client escrow funds into a personal offshore account. Not millions, but enough to trigger a regulatory investigation. 2 days later, a forensic accountant confirmed the transfers. The OSC froze his accounts. His partners voted to remove him as managing director. His corner office on King Street, the building that sat on Duval land, was cleared out by security while he sat in a lawyer's office trying to explain how everything had gone so wrong. He showed up at the Muskoka estate one more time. Drove up the long driveway, parked crookedly, stumbled out looking like he hadn't slept in days. His suit was wrinkled. His eyes were red. He looked nothing like the man who had walked into a hospital room 4 days earlier with a Mont Blanc pen and a plan. Imani, he called from the driveway. Please, just talk to me. She stood on the porch, Ruth in her arms, flanked by Lorraine on one side and Meredith on the other. 3 women. 3 generations of consequence. You can speak, Imani said, but not here, through my lawyer during business hours. That's the only conversation left. I made mistakes. You made choices, Bryce. Mistakes are accidental. You planned every single thing you did to me. He took a step forward, and a vehicle turned into the driveway behind him. A dark sedan, government plates. An officer stepped out, holding a folder. Bryce Kessler? Bryce turned slowly, his face the color of old paper. We have questions regarding financial discrepancies reported by your firm's compliance department. You're being asked to attend a formal interview. If you decline, a warrant will follow. Bryce looked back at Imani. For one moment, the mask dropped completely, and she saw what was underneath. Not cruelty, not ambition, but the small, terrified face of a man who had mistaken control for love and lost everything because he couldn't tell the difference. I'm sorry, he whispered. Imani held his gaze. I hope that's true, for your sake, and for the children who will carry your name. He was escorted to the sedan. The doors closed. The car rolled down the driveway, past the pine trees, past the frozen lake. past the stone gates that bore the Duval crest. Meredith let out a long, shaking breath. "I failed him somewhere." "You didn't," Imani said softly. "Some people choose who they become." Lorraine gathered her files. "I'll handle the rest from here. You focus on that baby." Imani nodded. She looked down at Ruth, who had slept through all of it. The shouting, the officers, the crumbling of a man who once believed he held all the power. "Your great-grandmother built all of this," Imani murmured against her daughter's cheek. "And your grandmother knew you'd need it before you were even born." She carried Ruth inside. The fire was still burning. The soup was still warm. Through the wide windows, the lake stretched out in frozen silence, and beyond it, 40 acres of shield rock and pine forest held steady, as they had for 100 years, as they would for 100 more. Meredith sat at the kitchen table, peeling apples. Lorraine packed her briefcase and paused at the door. "Your grandmother would be proud of you," she said. Imani smiled, tired, genuine, the first real smile in days. "She'd say I took too long." The door closed. The house settled into quiet. Ruth yawned, a sound so small it barely disturbed the air, and Imani rocked her slowly in the chair by the fire, watching the last light of a January afternoon paint gold across the snow. She wasn't the woman Bryce had tried to leave behind. She wasn't the wife begging at a hospital bedside. She wasn't anyone's afterthought or anyone's second choice. She was Imani Duval, daughter of a lineage that built things meant to last, and she was sitting in the house her grandmother made, holding a future her grandmother had protected, breathing air that belonged to no one but her. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, the ground beneath her felt solid.